Centuries before factories appeared, medieval engineers created self-operating machines. This video unveils the 21 forbidden blueprints of ancient automation that hint at forgotten revolutions, designs for mechanical scribes, and automated mills that were systematically erased from history. You will discover exactly why these revolutionary technologies were suppressed and what they reveal about the true nature of technological progress. We will explore why a self-writing monastic scribe threatened the church and how an automated grain mill challenged feudal lords. These lost inventions force us to reconsider everything we know about the medieval world and the forces that control innovation. What does it truly cost for a society to reject a technological revolution? The medieval world was far from a technological desert. Between the 12th and 14th centuries, a quiet revolution in mechanics was unfolding within the scriptoriums of monasteries and the workshops of royal courts. This was the High Middle Ages, a period where scholars, fueled by newly translated Arabic and Greek texts on hydraulics and engineering, began to ask profound questions. Could water power more than just a mill wheel? Could air pressure or intricate clockwork be harnessed to perform complex tasks without human hands? This intellectual curiosity set the stage for automation, but it also placed these inventors squarely between two powerful and often conflicting forces. The Catholic Church, for instance, held a deeply complex view. It readily embraced innovation that served its practical needs, championing advanced architecture for cathedrals and complex hydraulic systems for monastic water supplies. Yet any device that even hinted at challenging theological doctrine, like a machine that could replicate the work of a scribe and thus question the sacred nature of written word, was viewed with immediate suspicion. Similarly, kings and nobles were enthusiastic patrons of automata for entertainment. Elaborate mechanical angels that sang or self-moving throne rooms were marvels that displayed their power and wealth. However, that patronage had a strict limit. Any invention that threatened to upend the feudal system itself, such as automated mills that could replace the peasant labor upon which the entire economic structure rested, was a direct threat to their authority. This constant tension, this fragile dance between the desire for progress and the fear of its consequences, created the very conditions where revolutionary ideas were born in shadow, only to be hidden away as forbidden knowledge. Among the hushed scriptoriums of 13th century France, a forbidden device took shape. This was the first blueprint, the self-writing monastic scribe, a machine of gears and levers conceived within a Benedictine abbey. Imagine the quiet scratching of a quill, the work of weeks to copy a single holy text. Then consider a machine that could replicate that work in minutes. Historical accounts describe a contraption powered by weighted counterbalances, its heart a rotating drum fitted with interchangeable letter templates. It was a form of mechanical type, pressing ink onto vellum with a precision and speed no human hand could match. For the monks, this was more than a marvel, it was an existential crisis. The scriptorium was not just a place of devotion, it was an economic engine. The sale of meticulously copied manuscripts provided crucial income for the monastery. A machine that could do this work threatened to make that entire economic model obsolete, creating not just unemployment among the scribes, but a deep theological unease. How could a soulless mechanism perform the sacred act of transmitting the word of God? The abbots who discovered this invention faced a terrible choice. To embrace it was to risk chaos and accusations of witchcraft, for a device that worked without hands seemed to operate with a power beyond nature. To suppress it was to silence a revolution. The evidence of their decision is fragmentary but telling. A manuscript from the Abbey of St. Denis contains a cryptic marginal note referring to the silent brother who writes without hands. And in the archaeological record, unearthed from the waste pits of ancient scriptoriums, we find curious, finely made gear fragments that match no known book-binding tool or clockwork of the era. This was not merely a labor-saving innovation. It was a direct challenge to the very control of knowledge. Who would decide what was copied and how widely it could be spread if the process could be automated? The silent brother was silenced, its blueprints forbidden, and the course of technological history was quietly, decisively diverted. While the silent scribe threatened the control of words, another forbidden blueprint targeted the very foundation of feudal power, food. Far to the south, in the vibrant intellectual center of 12th century Cordoba, Islamic engineers perfected a different kind of automaton, the automated grain mill. This was not a simple water wheel turning a single grindstone. These were sophisticated industrial systems, entire complexes operating along rivers without the need for constant human supervision. Their genius lay in a mechanical form of thought. Using floating regulators in the water channels, the mills could sense the current's strength. A faster flow would trigger a series of levers and gears to increase the grinding speed, while a slower flow would adjust it downward to prevent damaging the stones. Another mechanism, an automatic grain feeder, would dispense a steady supply from a hopper, ensuring the process was continuous and perfectly balanced. This was automation in its purest form, a self-regulating machine that managed its own labor with breathtaking efficiency. For the common people, this promised liberation from the back-breaking toil of hand grinding and the exorbitant fees charged by the Lord's mill, where he claimed a portion of every grain ground as his tax. For the feudal lords and the church who held a monopoly on milling, this was an economic and political catastrophe in the making. A network of these automated mills could shatter their control over the food supply and the wealth it generated. So when Christian forces reconquered territories like Cordoba, the fate of these revolutionary machines was sealed. They were not studied or adopted. They were systematically dismantled, their gears smashed and their water channels blocked. The knowledge they represented was too dangerous to exist. Fragments of their designs survived only in a few technical manuscripts, hastily hidden away and later labeled as forbidden knowledge, a lost revolution in agriculture that could have fed millions and changed the structure of society itself. A ticking guardian patrolled the dark streets of 14th century German cities. This was the third forbidden blueprint, the mechanical night watchman, an intricate clockwork sentinel born from both ingenuity and desperation. Crafted by anonymous masters of gear and spring, these devices were marvels of their age. They did not simply stand guard, they moved. Weight-driven mechanisms allowed them to traverse predetermined paths along city walls or important streets. Their true genius, however, lay in their perception. They employed sophisticated tripwires nearly invisible in the moonlight, connected to internal counterweights. An intruder's foot would snag the wire, releasing a weight that set off a chain of events deep within the machine's brass heart. This could trigger a spring-loaded hammer to strike a resounding bell, or activate a rotating lantern that swept a beam of light across the shadows, creating the unmistakable and unsettling illusion of a living, searching presence. Some designs even incorporated mercury switches, tiny pools of liquid metal that would tilt and complete a circuit to sound the alarm, a principle of sensing and response that would not become common again for centuries. City councils, grappling with the devastating labor shortages wrought by the plague, initially welcomed these automated sentinels. They were a solution to empty watchtowers, a way to maintain a semblance of order when there were not enough living souls to do the job. But this embrace was short-lived. The powerful Watchmen's guilds rose in immediate protest. Their entire livelihood, their status, and their wages were built upon the essential human task of keeping the night watch. A machine that could do this, even imperfectly, was not a helper, it was a replacement. It threatened to render an entire class of skilled laborers obsolete. More subtly, and perhaps more dangerously, the city authorities began to fear the very autonomy they had commissioned. Security was not just a service, it was a pillar of their control. Who commanded a machine that patrolled on its own? Could its loyalty be guaranteed? The idea of a security force that operated outside direct human command, even a mechanical one, was a threat to the established power structure. So, under immense pressure from the guilds and fueled by their own growing unease, the city councils ordered the mechanical watchmen dismantled. The blueprints, once hailed as civic marvels, were purged from official records. The ticking guardians fell silent, their sophisticated parts scavenged for simpler clocks, their revolutionary potential lost to the fear of change and the protection of a fragile economic order. Deep within the great palace of Constantinople, a hidden concert played to an empty hall. This was the fourth forbidden blueprint, the self-playing musical automaton of the Byzantine court, an orchestra of gears and water that breathed without lungs. Commissioned by 11th century emperors to awe their guests, this was no simple music box. It was a monumental hydraulic organ and a mechanical orchestra powered by the palace's own aqueducts. Its heart was a vast pinned barrel, a cylinder studded with precisely placed pegs, much like a gigantic music roll. As this barrel turned, the pegs would trigger a labyrinth of levers and valves. These valves released compressed air, created by falling water, into a series of bronze pipes, producing notes of astonishing clarity and power. Simultaneously, other mechanisms would animate figures that appeared to strike drums and pluck strings, creating the illusion of a full, living ensemble performing the most complex imperial fanfares and sacred hymns. For the emperor, this was the ultimate display of technological supremacy, a way to demonstrate that his court could command harmony itself from mere metal and water. Yet this marvel came at a profound cost. The esteemed court musicians, whose live performances were a cornerstone of imperial ceremony, found themselves competing with a machine that never tired, never made a mistake, and never asked for payment. Their prestige, their very livelihoods, were rendered fragile by this automated rival. More dangerously, the device stirred a deep theological unease among the clergy. If a soulless collection of pipes and levers could perform a sacred hymn, did the music still carry divine grace? Could a prayer be authentically offered by a machine? The automaton stood at a perilous crossroads, challenging both economic hierarchy and spiritual doctrine. Its fate was sealed not by internal debate, but by external conquest. When the Knights of the Fourth Crusade sacked Constantinople in the year 1204, they discovered the remnants of this mechanical wonder. To the Western Crusaders, it seemed like pagan magic, a devilish contrivance that mimicked life. To the surviving Byzantine authorities struggling to rebuild, it was a dangerous heresy and a painful reminder of their fallen grandeur. In a rare moment of agreement, both sides actively suppressed the surviving designs. The intricate blueprints were burned, the pinned barrels smashed for scrap. A revolution in entertainment technology was lost, not to a lack of ingenuity, but to the fear of what happens when art escapes the human hand and the human heart. A steady hand was not always guaranteed in the medieval surgery, but in 13th century Salerno, a radical solution was being engineered. The Schola Medica Salernitana, the most advanced medical school of its era, became the secret birthplace of the fifth forbidden blueprint, the automated surgical assistant. Here, amid a growing understanding of anatomy and infection, innovative physicians designed mechanical devices to bring unheard of precision to the operating table. These were not robots in the modern sense, but sophisticated tools powered by springs and counterweights. One manuscript illustration depicts a device for bloodletting, where a spring-loaded lancet, released by a trigger, could make a perfectly consistent incision at a predetermined depth. This was not about replacing the surgeon's knowledge, but about perfecting their execution. Another design shows a suturing apparatus that used a system of interlocking levers to guide a needle through flesh with geometric accuracy, ensuring every stitch was evenly spaced and tensioned. For complex procedures like trepanning, drilling into the skull to relieve pressure, a guided template with an adjustable depth stop could prevent the horrifying consequence of a slip, a safeguard that could mean the difference between life and death. The motivation was profoundly practical, to reduce human error and the massive risk of infection from ragged, uncertain cuts. Yet this very promise of perfection sealed the fate of these inventions. The established medical guilds saw these automated assistants not as tools but as rivals. A physician's authority was built upon his unique, practiced skill, his revered touch. If any barber surgeon could use a machine to perform a flawless procedure, what value did a lifetime of guild training hold? The devices were condemned as soulless medicine, a terrifying concept in an age where healing was still deeply intertwined with spiritual and humoral balance. The healer's sacred touch, it was argued, was an essential part of the cure, something a cold mechanism could never provide. Under pressure from these powerful professional organizations, the illustrations were systematically scraped from manuscripts or painted over. The prototypes were dismantled, their intricate springs and levers discarded. A revolution in medical safety and consistency was sacrificed to protect the guild's control and a deeply held belief in the irreplaceable nature of the human hand, leaving patients for centuries to come at the mercy of a surgeon's trembling grip. While surgeons struggled with the limits of the human hand, merchants in the frozen north were confronting a different kind of obstacle: the staggering cost and slow pace of moving goods by land. Along the trade routes of the Hanseatic League in 14th century Northern Europe, a radical vehicle began to take shape: the self-propelling merchant cart. This was not a simple wagon. It was a land ship, a masterpiece of timber and canvas designed to conquer distance without a single draft animal. Its builders fitted it with tall, adjustable sails that could catch the relentless Baltic winds. To steer this wheeled vessel, they devised a system of geared tillers and locking mechanisms, allowing a single merchant to guide tons of cargo across the vast, flat coastal plains. Some designs even incorporated large wind-catching funnels, channeling the breeze with greater force to turn the cart's massive axles directly. The economic promise was staggering. A merchant could potentially transport a shipment of timber or wool from Lübeck to Riga in half the time, with none of the expenses for feeding, stabling, or replacing horses and oxen. For the powerful merchants of the League, this was a key to unimaginable wealth and efficiency. But for the local nobility and the established carting guilds, it was an existential threat. Their entire wealth was built upon a system of taxes, tolls, and fees tied directly to animal-powered transport. They controlled the stables, the teamsters, the fodder markets, and the right-of-way. A cart that moved without animals bypassed this entire economic ecosystem, rendering their control and their profits obsolete. The response was swift and decisive. Under intense pressure from these groups, the Hanseatic League itself, the very body that represented the merchants, began to enact strict trade regulations. They declared that certain trade routes were exclusively for animal-drawn traffic. They imposed exorbitant tariffs on any wheeled vehicle not pulled by beasts of burden. Prototypes of the wind carts were confiscated and publicly broken apart, their ingenious gears smashed to pieces as a warning. This was not a suppression born of ignorance, but of calculated economic protectionism. The self-propelling cart represented a clean break from the feudal logistics that had governed Europe for centuries, a chance to create a faster, cheaper, and more independent trade network. Its deliberate destruction ensured that land-based commerce would remain tethered to the pace of an ox for hundreds of years more, a lost revolution in transportation sacrificed to protect the profits of the powerful. High above the bustling courtyards of the House of Wisdom, a silent, mechanical servant awaited its command. This was the seventh forbidden blueprint, the automated library retrieval system of the Islamic Golden Age, a network of intellect made manifest in wood and rope. In vast multi-story libraries, scholars were not left to wander endless shelves. Instead, they presented a coded token, a small piece of wood or metal inscribed with a unique symbol at a central desk. When this token was inserted into a corresponding slot, it initiated a chain reaction of breathtaking ingenuity. A series of weighted counterweights would be released, their descent pulling on a specific arrangement of ropes and pulleys that snaked through the building's upper architecture. This orchestrated movement would travel to a particular shelf and even a specific manuscript, where a clever mechanism would gently nudge the desired book from its place. In some of the most advanced designs, the book would then be transported along a sloping channel or a moving cradle directly to the scholar's waiting hands, a journey of knowledge delivered without a single human librarian needing to climb a ladder. For the scholars of Baghdad and Cordoba, this was a triumph of efficiency, a way to manage collections of hundreds of thousands of manuscripts and make the world's knowledge instantly accessible. Yet this very efficiency threatened the library's human heart. The head librarians were not merely custodians, they were esteemed scholars in their own right. Their prestige built upon their unparalleled memory of the collection's layout and their role as gatekeepers of wisdom. An automaton that could locate any text in moments rendered their specialized knowledge, their curated paths through the shelves, completely obsolete. More dangerously, the system bypassed their discretion. A scholar seeking a text on alchemy or a philosophical treatise deemed controversial could now retrieve it without having to justify their request to a watchful human eye. This was a revolution in information access, and it terrified the powers that be. When the Mongol invasions laid waste to centers of learning like Baghdad, the great libraries were burned and their collections scattered. But it was not merely an act of blind destruction. Subsequent rulers who inherited the fragments of this knowledge actively suppressed the surviving technical designs for these retrieval systems. They recognized a profound truth that controlling the flow of information is a primary source of power. A system that allowed anyone to access any book without oversight was a direct threat to their authority. The blueprints for these mechanical marvels were labeled dangerous knowledge and hidden away, a revolution in information management lost for centuries, its principles only rediscovered in the digital age we now take for granted. The quiet vineyards of 13th century Burgundy witnessed a silent revolution in the rows of grapevines. Here, within Benedictine monasteries famed for their wine, the eighth forbidden blueprint took root, the mechanical vineyard Pruner. This was no simple tool, but a complex clockwork farmer, a device designed to bring machinic perfection to the ancient art of cultivation. Its heart was a water clock, a steady dripper that measured the passing of days and seasons. When the precise time for pruning arrived, this clock would trigger a series of weighted gears. The machine would then move slowly down a vineyard row on a simple wooden track, its movement guided by a system of ropes and pulleys. Its cutting arms, fitted with sharp, geared wheels were guided by wooden templates that ensured every cut was made at the exact same angle and height, creating a uniformity of growth no human crew could ever consistently achieve. For the winemaking monks, this was a matter of quality and devotion. Perfectly pruned vines yielded superior grapes, which in turn produced finer wines for sacrament and sale, bringing greater glory to God and financial stability to the monastery. It was a logical extension of their desire to bring order and precision to God's creation. Yet this very promise of perfection ignited fear throughout the feudal hierarchy. For the local peasants who relied on seasonal pruning for crucial wages, the machine was a direct threat to their survival. Their entire annual rhythm and their family's income was built around these vital agricultural tasks. A clockwork device that never tired and never demanded payment threatened to erase their role entirely, but the opposition did not only come from below. Surprisingly, some ecclesiastical authorities also moved to suppress the invention. They saw the mechanical pruner as an affront to the natural order, a disruption of the sacred rhythms of the seasons that should be guided by human prayer and toil, not by the relentless, soulless ticking of a water clock. The machine represented a fundamental shift from an agriculture of tradition to one of automation, and that shift was too radical for its time. Under pressure from both the peasant communities fearing destitution and church officials fearing heresy, the abbots were forced to relent. The ingenious pruning templates were burned as kindling, the intricate gears were melted down for simpler purposes, and the tracks through the vineyards were pulled up. A revolution in precision agriculture, capable of transforming wine production and food supply, was abandoned not because it failed to work, but because it worked too well, challenging the delicate social and economic balance that held the medieval world together. A different kind of forbidden knowledge was being calculated in the quiet halls of 14th century Oxford. At Merton College, a center for advanced mathematical study, scholars constructed an intricate device of bronze gears and finely engraved dials, the automated astronomical calculator. This was not a simple star chart, it was a mechanical computer. Its heart was a complex train of interlocking gears, each ratio painstakingly calculated to mirror the perceived motions of the planets. A user could set a series of input dials to a specific date, turn a central crank, and watch as a constellation of pointers moved across graduated scales to display the predicted positions of Mars, Venus, and Jupiter with remarkable accuracy. It could even forecast the timing of lunar and solar eclipses years in advance. For the scholars, this was the pinnacle of natural philosophy, a way to model the heavens and bring mathematical order to the cosmos. Yet this very precision ignited immediate alarm within the highest levels of the church. The calculator did not just describe the universe, it predicted its behavior. In the wrong hands, such a device could be used to generate astrological predictions independently of church oversight, creating a source of authority outside their control. A local lord might use it to decide the auspicious time for a battle, or a merchant to plan a voyage, all without seeking the blessing or interpretation of a priest. More fundamentally, it presented a cosmos that ran like a perfect, predictable machine, a concept that deeply challenged the theological view of a universe continually governed by God's direct and sometimes inscrutable will. The survival of a single gear, discovered in an Oxford archaeological dig, and marked with calibrations that match no known clock of the era, hints at the sophistication of these lost machines. This gear fragment reveals our understanding of planetary mechanics that would not be seen again until the work of Kepler and Galileo centuries later. The suppression of the Oxford calculator was a deliberate act. It was not a destruction born of ignorance, but of profound understanding. the church authorities recognized the threat a computational revolution posed to their monopoly on knowledge and the very narrative of creation. By silencing these geared oracles, they delayed a scientific revolution, ensuring that the path to understanding the stars would remain a theological, rather than a technological, journey for generations to come. Beneath the cobblestone streets of 13th century Siena, a hidden intelligence governed the flow of life itself. This was the 10th forbidden blueprint, the self-regulating aqueduct system, a network of automated channels that made the ancient Roman waterworks seem primitive by comparison. The challenge for these medieval engineers was not just bringing water into the city, but managing its distribution with perfect equity and constant pressure across dozens of public fountains, monastic houses, and private workshops. Their solution was a masterpiece of mechanical logic. They designed counterweighted gates made of bronze and oak that acted as primitive pressure sensors. When water flow increased after a heavy rain, the heightened pressure would push against a gate, which through a clever linkage of levers, would slowly close a secondary inlet, preventing a surge from damaging the delicate underground pipes. Conversely, during a drought, as pressure dropped, the gate would open wider, maximizing the available supply. Other systems used floating regulators, buoys attached to geared arms that could rise and fall with the water level in a main reservoir. When the level dropped too low, the falling float would trigger a switch that physically rotated a wooden pipe, diverting water away from non-essential uses like ornamental fountains and directing it solely to public wells for drinking. Some designs even incorporated timing mechanisms, water wheels with notched cams that would, after a certain number of revolutions, shift a valve to supply a different city district on a precise schedule. For the citizens, this was a promise of unprecedented civic order, a guarantee of fair and reliable water access for all, free from the whims of a human operator. But this very promise of fairness was its undoing. The entire municipal water supply was managed by a powerful official, the water bailiff and his guild. Their authority, their prestige, and a significant portion of their personal wealth came from their control over the spigots and sluice gates. They decided which neighborhood received water first, which merchant had to pay a premium for better access, and which monastery received a favor. An automated system that distributed water impartially, based on pre-set mechanical rules, completely eliminated their power. It erased their ability to grant favors, collect bribes, or punish enemies by withholding this essential resource. The city councils, while initially impressed by the engineering, ultimately sided with the established administration. They realized that a self-regulating system was also an ungovernable one, at least by their traditional means of patronage and control. The steady revenue from water fees and the political leverage held by the water bailiffs were too valuable to lose to a network of gears and floats. The blueprints for these automated aqueducts were declared municipal secrets and locked away. The mechanical valves were eventually replaced with simple, manually operated iron gates, returning absolute control to human hands. A revolution in public health and urban planning was sacrificed, not for a lack of ingenuity, but to preserve the intricate and profitable hierarchy of medieval city life. The rhythmic tolling of a bell could only communicate so much. Across the sprawling estates of 12th century monasteries, a more intricate language was being engineered. The 11th forbidden blueprint was the mechanical message relay, a silent network of signals that connected distant libraries, refectories, and workshops. In a large Cistercian abbey, a prior in the scriptorium might need to urgently request a specific manuscript from the library across the courtyard. Instead of dispatching a novice on a time-consuming errand, he would manipulate a series of levers at a small console. This action would lift a specific, weighted hammer on the library's exterior wall, which would then drop onto a corresponding bronze plate, producing a unique, resonant chime that the librarian had been trained to recognize. For longer distances, especially at night, the system employed polished silver reflectors. A coded series of flashes, directed by a pivoting shield in front of a lantern, could carry a simple message from the abbot's quarters to the gatehouse in an instant. The most complex versions used coded flag mechanisms, where a sequence of colored pennants would rise and fall on a central tower, a mechanical semaphore visible to every building in the complex. This was not just about speed, it was about creating a seamless, integrated community operating with a shared, instantaneous awareness. Yet this very efficiency struck at the core of monastic life. The daily journey of a novice walking a message from one building to another was not wasted time. It was a form of spiritual discipline, a scheduled moment for quiet reflection and humble obedience. Abbey leadership feared that replacing this pious foot traffic with the instant, impersonal click of a lever would erode the spiritual fabric of the monastery. It would remove opportunities for contemplation and, more dangerously, it would create a channel for communication they could not monitor. A system of mechanical signals could easily be co-opted for unauthorized conversations, for secrets passed between monks without the oversight of their superiors. The potential for gossip, conspiracy, or even heresy transmitted through this private network was a risk the abbots were unwilling to take. The practical advantages of instant coordination were deliberately sacrificed. The weighted hammers were melted down for candle holders, the polished reflectors were sold, and the flagpoles were taken down. A revolution in communication, a precursor to the telegraph, was abandoned not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well at a task the authorities ultimately decided should not be automated. The medieval world was learning that the greatest threat of a new technology was often not its failure, but its potential to redefine the very rituals that held society together. The steady hammer of the mint was the heartbeat of a kingdom's economy, a rhythm of manual labor that defined royal power for centuries. But in the 13th century, a new pulse began to beat within the walls of European mints, a mechanical rhythm that promised to reshape finance itself. This was the 12th forbidden blueprint, the automated coin minting press. Royal financial officials, desperate to combat rampant counterfeiting and the irregular, clipped coins that plagued trade, turned to water power. They designed a system where a water wheel turned a massive camshaft. This rotating shaft would lift a heavy hammer, a solid block of iron bearing the king's seal, high above a waiting blank of silver. At the precise moment, the cam would release, and the hammer would drop with immense, consistent force, stamping a perfectly crisp image onto the metal. The true genius, however, lay in the feeding mechanism. A separate set of gears, synchronized with the hammer's fall, would advance a strip of prepared metal blanks into position. Another set of precision guides ensured the upper and lower dies were in perfect alignment every single time, eliminating the slight shifts and double strikes that characterized hand-hammered coins. For the royal treasury, this was a dream of absolute control. Every coin leaving the mint would be identical in weight and design, making them impossible to clip and incredibly difficult to forge. It promised a stable, trustworthy currency that could fuel expansive trade and solidify the crown's financial authority. Yet this very promise of perfection ignited a firestorm of opposition. The powerful guilds of mint workers saw their highly skilled, well-paid craft being rendered obsolete by a machine that never tired and required only a mill keeper to oversee its relentless operation. Their entire social standing, passed down from father to son, was built around the sacred art of transforming raw metal into royal currency, but the resistance went deeper than guild fears. The royal administrators themselves began to have second thoughts. A manual mint required dozens of men, all of whom could be watched, managed, and held accountable. The entire process was slow, visible, and easily supervised. An automated press, however, was a black box. It could, in theory, be set to run through the night. Who would monitor its output? The potential for a corrupt official to run off a secret batch of coins, indistinguishable from the real currency, was a terrifying prospect. The machine offered too much efficiency, too much independence from the very human systems of oversight and trust that underpinned medieval governance. So, in a rare alliance of labor and management, the revolution was strangled in its cradle. The guilds protested and the authorities listened. The intricate designs for the automated presses were locked away in royal archives, labeled as dangerous innovations. The surviving fragments of these plans, studied centuries later, reveal a mechanical sophistication that could have standardized European currency 300 years before it finally happened. This was not merely a lost machine, it was a lost financial revolution, a sacrifice made on the altar of traditional labor and the fragile, human-controlled systems of power. A drawbridge required a guard's constant vigilance, a human link in the chain of defense. Yet hidden within the fortified walls of 14th century castles was a blueprint for a sentient gateway, the self-adjusting bridge. Military engineers, masters of both siegecraft and mechanics, designed counterweighted marvels that could sense a threat and react without a single shouted command. Their ingenuity lay in a network of hidden triggers. Some systems used carefully concealed pressure plates on the approach road, calibrated to distinguish between the steady tread of a merchant's cart and the concentrated, rhythmic impact of marching soldiers. The wrong weight pattern would release a series of interlocking locks, allowing massive, pre-tensioned counterweights to drop, yanking the bridge upward into its defensive position with startling speed. Other designs relied on geared lifting systems connected to tripwires or even submerged river sensors, creating a perimeter of invisible vigilance. For a garrison commander, this offered a perfect, instantaneous response to a surprise attack, eliminating the fatal delay of a sleeping or distracted guard. But this very reliability became its greatest liability in the eyes of military authorities. A feudal lord's power was built upon a pyramid of loyal vassals and knights, each with a defined role in the defense of the realm. Automating the castle gate removed a crucial responsibility from a trusted noble, a symbolic and practical demotion that could breed resentment and undermine the entire structure of feudal loyalty. More critically, the High Command feared the unreliability of an automated defense. What if the mechanism failed to raise the bridge, or worse, raised it at the wrong moment, trapping their own scouts outside or isolating a key defensive tower? A human guard could exercise judgment, could recognize a friend in the fog or a ruse in the darkness. A machine, driven by simple weights and triggers, possessed no such discretion. The potential for a catastrophic failure born of rigid automation was a risk the military minds of the age were unwilling to take. The surviving fragments of these designs, tucked away in forgotten engineering manuscripts, show a grasp of defensive automation that would not be seen again until the modern era. These bridges were not abandoned because they were too primitive, but because they were too advanced, challenging the very human-centric nature of medieval warfare and command. A revolution in autonomous defense was sacrificed to preserve the absolute, if fallible, control of the knight over his gate. The vibrant reds and deep blues of medieval textiles were not just a matter of artistry, but of chemistry, a delicate dance of heat and timing that could be ruined in an instant. In the bustling textile centers of 13th century Flanders, a forbidden solution emerged, the 14th forbidden blueprint, the Automated Dying Vat. Flemish innovators seeking to eliminate the costly inconsistencies of hand dyeing engineered self-regulating systems that brought machinic precision to the cauldron. Their genius lay in a combination of observation and mechanics. They employed floating thermometers, hollow glass bulbs filled with colored alcohol that would rise and fall with the vat's temperature. This floating device was connected to a series of brass levers. If the temperature rose too high, the expanding liquid would push the float upward, triggering a lever that would slowly close a draft door on the fire below. If the temperature dropped too low, the float would descend, opening the draft to intensify the flames. For the timed addition of mordants, the chemical fixatives that made color permanent, they used water clock drippers. After a precisely measured volume of water dripped into a small bucket, the weight would trip a release, tilting a chute that deposited a pre-measured amount of chemical into the swirling dye. This ensured every batch of wool or linen was subjected to an identical process, producing colors of unwavering consistency and drastically reducing the spoilage of expensive imported dyes like madder and woad. For the merchant clothiers, this was a gateway to unmatched quality and profit, but for the powerful dyeing guilds, it was an existential threat. Their entire power was built upon the closely guarded secrets of their craft, the whispered knowledge of exactly when to add the alum or how long to simmer the weld for a perfect yellow. These secrets were their livelihood, passed from master to apprentice in a long and costly initiation. An automated vat that could perform these steps perfectly without a master's intuition rendered their hard-won expertise completely valueless. It democratized a process they had fought to keep mysterious and exclusive. The guilds moved swiftly and decisively. They declared the machines a form of cheating, a soulless process that could not possibly capture the true art of dyeing. They enforced strict ordinances banning their use, and members caught experimenting with such devices faced heavy fines and expulsion from the guild, a sentence of professional and social ruin. The blueprints for these automated vats were systematically destroyed, the delicate glass thermometers smashed, the precise water clocks dismantled. A revolution in industrial chemistry and quality control was lost, not to a lack of scientific understanding, but to the fierce protectionism of the artisan guilds, proving that the path of progress could be blocked not only by kings and clergy, but by the very guardians of a craft itself. The relentless sea offered a rhythm more reliable than any river, and along the misty coasts of 12th century England and France, monastic engineers learned to make the ocean itself their servant. This is the 15th forbidden blueprint, the mechanical tide mill. These were not simple water wheels placed in an estuary. They were complex systems designed to think with the tides. Their genius lay in a floating marker, a buoyant device that rose and fell with the water level in a specially constructed holding pond. As the tide surged in, the rising float would trigger a geared mechanism that opened a series of sluice gates, channeling the powerful incoming flow directly onto the mill's water wheel. Then, as the tide began to ebb, the sinking float would reverse the process, closing the inlet gates and opening others to release the captured water from the pond, ensuring the wheel continued to turn for hours after the tide had gone out. This was a self-regulating power source, a machine that could manage its own fuel supply based on the lunar cycle. To complement this, an automatic grain feeder, powered by the mill's own axle, would dispense a steady stream of grain into the grindstones, creating a fully automated production line that operated day and night without a single monk needing to brave the cold, wet conditions to adjust a gate. For the isolated coastal abbeys, this was a miracle of sustenance and income, providing a constant supply of flour for their communities and for trade, all powered by a free and limitless natural force. Yet this very independence sparked fear. Local fishing communities, whose lives were intimately tied to the tidal flats, watched in alarm as the monks constructed their elaborate barrages and holding ponds. They feared these structures would disrupt the delicate coastal ecology, changing the tidal flow and destroying the spawning grounds for the fish they relied upon. More directly, the traditional millers who operated small, human-supervised mills along freshwater streams found themselves competing with an automated giant that never slept and never demanded a share of the flour as payment. Their livelihoods began to evaporate. Even within the church itself, voices of opposition rose. Some ecclesiastical authorities saw the tide mills as an act of hubris, a dangerous attempt to tame and mechanize a force that God had intended to remain wild and free. The very predictability of the automated system seemed to challenge the divine mystery of the natural world. Caught between the protests of the local populace and the theological unease of their own superiors, the monastic communities were forced to relent. The floating markers were removed, the ingenious geared linkages were dismantled for simpler uses, and the sluice gates were locked into a single, manual position. A profound understanding of renewable energy was abandoned, not because it failed to work, but because its success threatened to unravel the delicate social and environmental balance that defined life on the medieval coast. A steady compass needle meant nothing on a storm-tossed deck. For 13th-century Mediterranean mariners, navigating beyond the sight of land was a constant gamble, their magnetic compasses swinging wildly with every pitch and roll of the ship. Their solution was a mechanical marvel, the self-correcting navigation instrument. These were not simple boxes with a needle inside. Shipboard engineers devised counterweighted gimbal systems, a set of rings mounted within rings, each pivoting on a different axis. This ingenious suspension allowed the central compass housing to remain perfectly level, isolated from the violent motions of the vessel, so the needle could point unerringly north. But they went even further. Understanding that the iron nails and fittings in the ship's hull could distort the magnetic field, they developed automated compensation mechanisms. Small, adjustable weights of lodestone were arranged on a geared ring around the compass. By turning a dial, a navigator could calibrate the device, moving these countermagnets to cancel out the ship's own magnetic interference, a process of real-time error correction that delivered a true reading for the first time. For the captains pushing into the open Atlantic, this was a key to the world. It promised safer, faster voyages, the ability to navigate confidently under cloud-covered skies and through treacherous seas. Yet this very promise of independence threatened the old god of the sea, the powerful maritime guilds of pilots, men whose entire prestige was built upon a lifetime of memorizing coastlines, star patterns, and the subtle feel of currents, saw their hard-won expertise being made obsolete by a machine. Why pay for an expensive pilot to guide you into a familiar port if any captain with a calibrated instrument could find his own way? Furthermore, the port authorities in cities that controlled lucrative trade routes, like Venice and Genoa, relied on a system of forced pilotage and regulated navigation to maintain their monopolies. They could dictate which ships went where and collect hefty fees for the privilege. A navigational device that allowed a ship to strike out on a new, more direct course, or to bypass a controlled strait entirely, was a direct threat to this economic control. The evidence of this suppression is subtle but telling. Shipwrecks from the period reveal standard compasses, but none of the sophisticated gimbal and compensation units described in a few surviving captains' logs. Those very logs speak of instruments being confiscated by port officials under vague ordinances of maritime safety. The blueprints for these self-correcting devices were not lost to a storm, but to a deliberate campaign of professional protectionism. A revolution in exploration was held back for centuries, not because the technology was lacking, but because the established powers of the sea feared the freedom it would bring to any captain who possessed it. High above the city, a new kind of prayer was being forged in bronze and iron. The 17th forbidden blueprint, the automated bell-ringing system, transformed cathedral towers into gigantic, self-playing musical instruments. In 14th century Europe, bell founders and master clockmakers collaborated to create mechanical carillons of breathtaking complexity. At the heart of these systems was a large, rotating drum, a pinned barrel much like the one in the Byzantine automaton, but on a monumental scale. This wooden cylinder was studded with precisely placed iron pegs. As it turned, driven by the cathedral's massive clockwork, these pegs would trip a series of levers connected to heavy hammers. Each hammer was assigned to a specific bell in the tower's array, from the smallest treble to the massive tenor bell that could be heard for miles. The arrangement of the pegs on the drum was a form of physical programming, a sequence that could be changed to make the machine play different hymns, call the faithful to prayer at exact intervals, or mark the hours with intricate, unchanging patterns. For the church administration, this was the ultimate tool for order and precision, ensuring that the sacred rhythm of the day was maintained without human error or fatigue. It guaranteed that the call to Mass would sound at the same moment across the entire diocese, a powerful symbol of unified faith. Yet this very perfection stripped the bells of their human soul. The teams of bell ringers were not mere laborers, they were skilled craftsmen in a sacred guild. Their work was a physical act of devotion, a coordinated dance of strength and timing that shook the very tower. Each peal was unique, a living, breathing expression of the community's spirit. A machine that could replicate their work with cold, metallic consistency made their profound ritual seem obsolete. The bell-ringing guilds, whose power was built on this essential and highly visible role, protested vehemently. They argued that a soulless automaton could not possibly imbue the sound with the same spiritual weight, that the ringing of bells was a prayer in itself, requiring a human heart behind the pull of the rope. Church authorities, while initially enamored with the technology's precision, came to a grim realization. An automated carillon was a closed system. It could not improvise for a sudden royal funeral or a victory celebration. It could not infuse its ringing with the urgency of a call to arms or the somatone of a penitential procession. Its programming was fixed, its music predetermined. By automating this most public of sounds, the Church risked losing its ability to communicate the emotional and immediate needs of the moment. The technology was simply too rigid for the fluid demands of spiritual and civic life. The magnificent pinned barrels were removed and stored in dusty attics. The intricate hammer mechanisms were dismantled for scrap, and the bell ropes were returned to human hands. A revolution in automated music and public timekeeping was silenced, sacrificed to preserve the guild's livelihood and, more importantly, the irreplaceable human spirit behind the sacred sound. A trebuchet's crew knew their lives depended on the rhythm of the throw, a dance of muscle and timing that could win or lose a siege. But in the heat of the Crusades, a new rhythm emerged, one dictated by gears and measured weights. This was the 18th forbidden blueprint, the mechanical siege engine loader. Military engineers, desperate to turn the tide at fortified walls like Acre and Jerusalem, designed automated systems to bring machinic precision to the chaos of the battlefield. For the massive trebuchet, the most revolutionary component was the automatic projectile feeder. This was a wooden hopper mounted on a pivoting arm that used a system of geared notches and gravity. After each launch, the recoil of the throwing arm would trip a release catch. This action would allow a single, perfectly rounded stone from the hopper to roll down a chute and settle into the sling, ready for the next shot, all without a single soldier having to climb into the firing position under enemy arrows. Even more crucial was the standardized counterweight. Traditional trebuchets relied on a mass of stone and earth in a swinging box, a weight that could shift and settle, altering the throw with every shot. The automated system replaced this with a series of identical, pre-measured stone blocks, held in a cage by a locking mechanism, a geared winch turned by men or a horse gin in a safe location would raise the entire cage to a precise height marked on a graduated scale. A single trigger release would then drop the entire consistent weight, ensuring the throwing arm was propelled forward with the exact same force every single time. For the engineers, this was the key to victory. It meant a trebuchet could land 5, 10, even 20 stones in the exact same spot on a castle wall, systematically breaking it down with a speed and accuracy no human crew could ever match. Yet this very promise of perfect performance is what led commanders to reject it. Seasoned knights and generals distrusted the intricate clockwork. In the mud and blood of a siege camp, who could fix a jammed gear or a bent release catch? A team of trained men might be slower, but their methods were understood, their failures predictable. A machine that failed was a catastrophic, total failure. More profoundly, the automated loader challenged the very culture of medieval warfare. The operation of a siege engine was a communal act, a test of coordinated strength and courage that bonded a fighting unit. Replacing that shared, heroic effort with a soulless mechanism operated from a distance seemed to strip the battle of its honor, reducing the art of war to a mere industrial process. The evidence for these suppressed designs comes from fragmented engineering scrolls recovered from Crusader castles, their diagrams showing geared feeding mechanisms that were never built at scale. The military conservatism of the age was not born of stupidity, but of a deep-seated preference for the fallible human spirit over the cold, unforgiving logic of a machine. A revolution in ballistic science was abandoned at the castle gates, sacrificing consistency for a form of control that commanders still felt they understood. The fiery heart of a medieval glass furnace held a secret more precious than any gem, a self-regulating intelligence. This 19th forbidden blueprint, the self-regulating glass furnace, transformed Venetian and French workshops into temples of thermal precision during the 13th century. Glassmaking was an alchemy of heat, where a few degrees too many could turn a batch of priceless crystalline glass into a useless, bubbled mess, while too little heat would leave it brittle and impure. The solution was a system of ceramic regulators and mechanical dampers, a primitive thermostat built to think with fire. Craftsmen designed ceramic cones of different compositions, each formulated to soften and bend at a specific critical temperature. As the furnace approached that threshold, the slowly deforming cone would trigger a counterweighted lever. This lever was connected to a damper, a metal plate that controlled the airflow into the fire. If the temperature climbed too high, the bending ceramic would pull the damper partly closed, starving the flames of oxygen and cooling the furnace. If the heat dropped, the mechanism would open the damper wider, stoking the fire back to its ideal rage. This allowed for the sustained, perfect heat needed for different glass recipes, from the delicate clarity of a goblet to the deep, strong color of stained glass for a cathedral window. For the master glaziers, this was a gateway to unparalleled consistency and quality, a way to eliminate the costly guesswork and ruined batches that had plagued their craft for generations. Yet this very promise of perfection was the very reason the powerful glassmaking guilds moved to destroy it. Their entire authority was built upon the mystique of their craft, the secret knowledge passed from master to apprentice about the exact color of the flame or the feel of the heat that signaled the perfect moment to work the glass. These were the mysteries that justified their high prices and exclusive status. A system of ceramic cones and mechanical arms could be built and operated by anyone with the blueprint, democratizing a process they had fought to keep shrouded in exclusive ritual. It transferred control from the artisan's intuitive experience to a machine's unwavering logic. The guilds acted decisively to protect their monopoly. They declared the automated furnaces a form of heresy, arguing that only the human soul, attuned to the fire's spirit, could truly command the glass. Members caught using the regulators faced expulsion, a professional death sentence that cut them off from the community and its secrets. The delicate ceramic cones were smashed, the counterweighted levers were melted down, and the designs were purged from guild records. A revolution in industrial process control, a precursor to the automated systems that would define modern manufacturing, was lost not to a lack of ingenuity, but to the fierce, protective walls built by the artisans themselves. The path of progress was blocked not by a king or a priest, but by the very masters of the craft. A mortar and pestle required more than simple force, it demanded a prayerful rhythm. Within the quiet confines of 12th century monastic infirmaries, that sacred rhythm was being mechanized. This was the 20th forbidden blueprint, the automated herb grinder of the monastic pharmacy. Medical monks seeking to bring consistency and speed to their healing work engineered elaborate processing devices. These were not single tools but integrated systems. A single water wheel or hand crank could power a series of operations. It would first turn a set of stone grinding wheels to crush dried roots and leaves into a coarse powder. This powder would then travel down a chute onto a series of vibrating sorting screens, woven mesh trays shaken by an off-center cam. The finest, most potent dust would sift through the top screen, while coarser fragments would be caught on lower levels, each channeled into separate collection bowls. For complex remedies requiring mixtures, a final stage might involve a rotating drum with internal paddles, perfectly blending different powdered herbs into a uniform compound. For the brothers tending the sick, this was a miracle of efficiency. It meant a poultice for a wound or a tonic for a fever could be prepared in minutes instead of hours, with every batch having identical strength and composition. This consistency was itself a form of healing, eliminating the dangerous variations of hand-prepared doses. Yet this very promise of perfect, repeatable medicine is what led to its suppression. The monastic authorities, the abbots and senior infirmarians, grew deeply concerned. The slow, mindful process of grinding herbs by hand was not merely a chore, it was a devotional act. With each circular motion of the pestle, the monk was meant to be reciting prayers for the patient's recovery, infusing the medicine with divine grace. A machine that ground the herbs without this sacred intention produced a substance that was, in their view, spiritually inert. Furthermore, the automated system bypassed the traditional knowledge of the master herbalist. His expertise lay in judging the texture and fineness of a grind by feel and sight, knowledge gained through decades of experience. A machine that standardized this process rendered his hard-won intuition valueless, challenging an entire system of learned, experiential wisdom. The technology was simply too effective, too detached from the human spirit they believed was essential to the cure. The intricate geared mills were dismantled, the sorting screens were burned, and the blueprints were hidden away in locked chests. A revolution in pharmaceutical consistency was abandoned, proving that even the most practical of automations could be forbidden if it threatened to sever the perceived sacred link between the healer's prayer and the patient's cure. A clock that winds itself sounds like a modern dream, yet this was the precise ambition behind the final forbidden blueprint. The self-winding clock mechanism of medieval towers stands as a profound testament to a road not taken, a path toward sustainable automation that was deliberately blocked. In the 14th century, as magnificent public clocks began to dominate the skylines of European cities, a new problem emerged for their makers. These towering timekeepers were driven by massive weights, heavy stones or lead blocks that slowly descended, powering the gear train. Once the weights reached the bottom of their shaft, the clock would stop, requiring a dedicated winder to manually haul them back to the top, often a daily and laborious task. The solution crafted by ingenious clockmakers was to harness the environment itself. Some designs incorporated small wind-catching sails, similar to those on a mill, mounted on the clock tower. As the wind turned these sails, a geared transmission would slowly, steadily ratchet the great weights upward, a constant and silent rewinding powered by the air itself. Other systems used a miniature water wheel, fed by a diverted stream or even rainwater collected on the roof, to perform the same task. The goal was a public clock that never stopped, a truly autonomous machine maintaining perfect civic time without a single human hand touching a crank. For the city councils who commissioned these clocks, the promise of perpetual, accurate timekeeping was initially alluring. It meant their city could boast a marvel of modern engineering, a symbol of order that never faltered. Yet this very autonomy quickly sparked administrative fear. The official clock winder was not just a laborer, he was a trusted municipal employee. His daily ascent into the tower was a ritual of civic reliability, a visible, human guarantee that the city's rhythm would continue. Authorities realized that a machine that rewound itself was also a machine they could not directly control. What if the gears jammed during a windless week? What if a frozen water wheel left the clock stopped for days? A human winder could be commanded, held accountable, and his work verified. A self-winding mechanism operated on its own schedule, beholden only to the whims of nature. This unreliability, or rather the fear of it, was the stated reason for suppression. But the deeper truth was about control and employment. The position of clockwinder was a prized one, often given as a political favor or a reward for loyalty. Eliminating this job threatened a small but symbolically important part of the civic patronage system. The self-winding designs were declared too complex and untrustworthy. The delicate wind sails were dismantled, the small water wheels were blocked, and the blueprints were filed away as impractical curiosities. A landmark achievement in sustainable technology, a clock powered by sun and rain, was abandoned not for a failure of engineering, but for a preference for predictable human labor over unpredictable mechanical independence. This final blueprint closes our list, but it opens a far larger question. What does the systematic loss of these 21 revolutions mean for us today? Across these 21 forbidden blueprints, a clear and chilling pattern emerges from the ashes of suppressed history. The single most powerful force working against these inventions was simple economic protectionism. Guilds of scribes, millers, dyers, and bell ringers did not oppose these machines because they were ineffective. They fought them precisely because they worked too well, threatening to shatter the craft monopolies that guaranteed their wages, their status, and their very way of life. A self-writing scribe was not rejected for poor penmanship, but because it endangered the entire economy of the scriptorium. The resistance was not against the machine's failure, but against its devastating success. Running a close second was the deep-seated opposition from religious authorities. The church stance was not one of blanket ignorance, but of profound theological caution. Any device that encroached upon the sacred, whether it was a machine performing a scribe's devotional labor, a mechanical orchestra playing hymns, or an automaton grinding herbs without prayer, was seen as stripping spiritual meaning from a divinely ordained human act. The fear was that soulless mechanisms could not imbue their work with grace, reducing sacred rituals to empty, mechanical processes. This was a battle for the soul of work itself. Political and military leaders exhibited their own brand of resistance, rooted in the fear of lost control. A self-adjusting bridge that operated without a loyal knight, or an automated mint that could run unsupervised, presented a terrifying vacuum of authority. These leaders preferred a slower, human-centered system they could command and punish over a faster, automated one that operated outside their direct oversight. Their power depended on a pyramid of feudal loyalty and visible control, both of which were undermined by autonomous systems. Finally, we see a recurring technological conservatism, a preference for the familiar imperfection of human hands over the cold precision of a machine. Master herbalists, seasoned ship pilots, and veteran siege engineers all trusted their hard-won intuition and experience. They distrusted a mechanism that could jam, break, or operate without the nuanced judgment that came only from a lifetime of practice. This was not always stubbornness. It was often a rational fear of catastrophic, unpredictable failure in systems where error meant ruin. Together, these patterns of suppression reveal a medieval world trapped in its own success. The very social, religious, and economic structures that provided order and stability were the same forces that actively strangled revolutionary change. The forbidden blueprints were not lost to a lack of brilliance, but to a societal immune system that rejected the future to protect the present. Our journey through these forbidden blueprints reveals a world poised on the brink of an industrial revolution that never was. These were not isolated curiosities, but a widespread and sophisticated movement toward automation, systematically dismantled by the very fabric of medieval society. The potential for a world transformed by self-regulating machines existed not in the 1700s, but in the 1300s, blocked not by a lack of genius, but by an overabundance of order. The guilds, the church, and the nobility were not villains in this story. They were guardians of a stability they believed was sacred. Their suppression of these technologies was a rational, if tragic, calculation to preserve the economic, spiritual, and political systems that defined their world. The true cost of this suppression is almost incalculable. It delayed the rise of precision manufacturing, postponed revolutions in transportation and medicine, and held back our understanding of the natural world for centuries. The gears of progress were not still, they were thrown into reverse. This historical investigation forces a difficult question upon our modern world. The patterns of protectionism, control maintenance, and technological conservatism are not relics of a distant past. They are active forces in our own time. We see them in the resistance to renewable energy from fossil fuel interests, in the ethical debates surrounding artificial intelligence and genetic engineering, and in the battles over digital currencies that challenge traditional banking. The same fears that silenced the mechanical scribe now whisper doubts about automated journalism. The same forces that smashed the automated mint now question decentralized finance. Our own revolutionary blueprints are being drawn right now, and they will inevitably face their own trials by fire. So as you reflect on these 21 lost revolutions, ask yourself what marvels of our own age might be labeled forbidden knowledge by future historians. What technologies do we fear not because they fail, but because they succeed too well at challenging our established order? The story of medieval automation is not a closed book. It is a mirror, and the reflection staring back at us holds the key to understanding our own technological crossroads. If this exploration of history's hidden revolutions has sparked your curiosity, I invite you to share your thoughts on our modern forbidden blueprints in the comments below, and subscribe for more journeys into the lost chapters of technological history.